Welcome back to Uncharted X. My name is Ben, and today I want to take you on a journey below one of the oldest structures on Earth, to a place that very few people have seen. In these deep tunnels can be found some remarkable evidence for one of the great mysteries of ancient Egypt, and during my visit there, in the very lowest levels, we saw something truly astonishing that, as far as I know, has never been documented publicly.
Underneath the Step Pyramid.
What lies beneath the ground of ancient Egypt is an endlessly fascinating subject, as almost all of the most famous monuments and sites from this mysterious period have huge and integral elements located underground. This design tenet of extensive subterranean work into the bedrock holds true in particular for one site, perhaps more so than any other, that of the huge necropolis of Saqqara. Not only is Saqqara home to the incredible underground galleries and single-piece stone boxes of the Serapeum, there are many other examples of gigantic shafts sunk deep into the bedrock, and extensive catacombs and tunnels that go for quite literally miles. People have been buried here in these catacombs for thousands of years, and the evidence for mass burial is still in plain view if you know where to look. The term necropolis is well earned, but whether or not this was the site's original purpose is still an open question. In a recent video, we took a quick look at what lies below the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, through the recently renovated Persian tunnel. Per its name, this tunnel wasn't part of the original work here, it was dug by the Persian Empire in an attempt to penetrate the structure. It runs just beneath the ground and today gives tourists, via a special ticket, an incredible view of what's below the Step Pyramid. A huge, 100-foot deep shaft with a massive multi-piece granite box at the bottom. In this video, I'll show you what it's like to actually go down here and not only explore the area around the granite box, but also into the levels of passages and chambers that have been carved into the bedrock beneath it, and we'll examine some of the remarkable evidence for advanced machining that can still be found down here. The Step Pyramid occupies a famous spot in Orthodox history. It has the label of the very first pyramid to have been built by the dynastic Egyptians, attributed to Pharaoh Djoser of the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom, and was supposedly designed by the polymath Imhotep. The Step Pyramid is the bridge that is used to show progression in Old Kingdom pyramid architecture. A series of stacked mastabas leading to the conception of the iconic pyramid shape. Everything I've seen of the Step Pyramid myself, and I've visited Saqqara more than 10 times now at this point to take a look at it, certainly supports the idea that this structure was built by the dynastic Egyptians. It would still have been a monumental amount of work, requiring somewhere around 850,000 tons of stone. But there's nothing really megalithic nor particularly precise about the structure. The stonework is quite rough when you examine it closely, although it was once cased in fine Tura limestone. It was certainly within the Bronze Age capabilities of the 3rd dynasty. The Step Pyramid was built in several phases, being redesigned and expanded over time. In fact, it's the only pyramid that isn't square, with its final rectangular base measuring 125 by 110 meters or 410 by 328 feet. There's even wood used in the construction, particularly in the mortared scaffolding over the great shaft that's beneath it. I do think the whole first conceptual pyramid idea does kind of go off the rails, however, when you consider what were supposedly the very next pyramids built after this one. The massively megalithic and precise pyramid at Maidum, which despite its appearance of steps today was once a true pyramid that had its outer shell collapse. And then came the gigantic works at Djoser, the red and bent pyramids. And then, of course, the mighty iconic Giza pyramids, beginning with the biggest of them all, the Great Pyramid. It really is something of a leap to think that the Step Pyramid was the genesis for the whole pyramid concept, and then immediately the greatest of all pyramids are constructed. It's akin to making a 2-level treehouse, getting the idea of building vertically up in stories, and then immediately constructing the Empire State Building. Let's not forget that according to the Orthodox timeline, after the 4th dynasty pyramids at Maidum, Djoser, and Giza were built, more pyramids were constructed in Egypt, but none of them ever achieved the quality nor the size of the 4th dynasty works. I do have a video that explores the details of this contradiction in some depth, so check that out if you haven't seen it, the link is below. But I do have an alternative explanation to offer, something that I think perhaps fits with the concepts of longer timelines and inheritance, and certainly, at least to me, makes more sense of the technological progression. Assume, just for a moment, that something of the great megalithic pyramids already existed at this time, in the Third Dynasty, and were constructed by not the Old Kingdom ancient Egyptians, but by their predecessors, those they described as the Shemsu-Hor, or perhaps those associated with the time of the gods, known as Zep-Tepi. Is it not possible that the Step Pyramid's design might have been inspired by these works, and it was an attempt to replicate that shape, to revere and respect the work through imitation? To try and capture some of the same mystique, potency, and history of these incredible structures by replicating them as best as you can. This is human nature, after all. It's still how ceremonies and ritual works today, a replication of past events in order to capture and honor significance. And the concept extends easily to architecture. We replicate structures today in order to inspire awe, reverence, or meaning. As we'll see a little later on in the video, this idea of the dynastic Egyptians imitating and replicating older and far superior objects is certainly not limited to just this example of the Step Pyramid. So, to be clear, I do think this structure was built by the dynastic Egyptians, but at the same time I think there is significant evidence that they built it over an already existing subterranean structure. We'll explore this evidence as we begin our special permissions access into the bedrock beneath it. Most of the modern-day excavations were carried out here from 1926 and throughout the 20th century by the late French Egyptologist Jean-Philippe Loyer. The whole structure and the tunnels beneath it have been further excavated and fully renovated by the Egyptian Antiquities Ministry over the last decade. And I have to say that they've really done an outstanding job.
But of course, mind your head, mind your step, mind your step.
1 minute, 1 minute.
Mind your head.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
The Step Pyramid has been surrounded in scaffolding for years now, but today this is all gone, and just compare this footage of the entrance passage taken during the renovations versus what it looks like today. That's not to say that there hasn't been some questionable decisions made in the quest to clean this area up and open it up for tourism. I've mentioned this in a couple of previous videos, but digging through my archives of footage, I did happen to find some actual film of what I'm talking about, which is the fact that there's been something in the order of 50 to 80 tons of machined alabaster or white calcite removed from the depths below the Step Pyramid, piled up behind the entrance and ultimately bulldozed into the ground. You can see the piles of stone in this footage, taken during the renovation work, all brought up from the tunnels below. Nowadays, there is a huge flat earthen berm here, basically the remnants of all of this ancient carved stone that's been bulldozed and buried. At the edge of the berm, if you look around, it's still possible to find small pieces of alabaster that bear some pretty obvious machining marks, tube drills like these examples, or machined surfaces still bearing tooling marks.
So at least, maybe this will be the last one, as you can see here. On these surfaces. Oh. So this 50 tons of this was dug from underneath the corridor.
Put in the lights for the striation.
Yeah. This was not the best evidence we had here.
No, we had some nice. It definitely counts, though.
I was just telling you,
I have some
you
pictures.
guys, like this might not be the last time we see them.
What's your address?
How much?
No free shipping. There used to be tens here of this. Like last tour, like last year, I have the other pieces also on a video. But yeah, feel this surface. If we find little pounds here, this is because of aging and being knocked here and there. If it's all like this, then you will find it all over here. Yeah. This is of course not a natural stone to the side. It is coming from around 350 kilometers to the south from here. Hatnoub is the area, and we can see the crystallization in it. So imagine that we had, plus the 40,000 jars, we had also around 50 tons of this coming from here, and another 30 tons coming from the other shaft that is known as the southern tomb.
We will also see some examples down below in the ground that are still in place. But bear in mind that these tunnels were most likely all cased in worked alabaster and not as rough as they appear today. As we proceed into the bedrock below the Step Pyramid, my initial impressions were of the confusing and labyrinthian nature of the passages. We passed through several junctions that have other tunnels leading off in various directions. This maze-like nature of the passages continued throughout the visit, and although we couldn't explore everywhere, I'm already looking forward to getting back here again in the future. The orthodox explanation for all of these passages is that several separate galleries were dug in the Third Dynasty, but done so imprecisely, such that some of them ran into each other. Then came the tomb robbers, who just dug straight tunnels in their search for treasure, and this led to the multiple intersections of passages that we can visit today. There are contradictions and issues with this explanation, however, not the least of which is that there is far more tunnels, passages and rooms in the ground here than could be explained by just a few burial galleries. The sum total of passages down here has been estimated to distance at least some 3.5 miles or 5.7 kilometres. In truth, we really don't know what these passages were for, nor how far they extend, as excavation work is still going on in the lower levels. Anecdotally, the late and famous guide and chematologist Hakim El-Ayawan was known to have said that at one time a man could walk from Giza to Saqqara entirely underground. Also, during modern excavations down here, a hip bone from a female was discovered in one of the tunnels known as Gallery 3, but the results from carbon dating of the bone came back as much earlier than the conventional dating for Pharaoh Djoser of the Third Dynasty, which seems to indicate that the subterranean complex was in place and being used by people long before the Step Pyramid was ever constructed on top. As we enter the third level of passages, we reach the famous tiled chambers, a small set of rooms that were found covered in beautiful small blue tiles, still holding their colour after thousands of years. Some few tiles are still in place down here, but the majority of them have been removed and restored for display in the nearby Saqqara Museum, which is definitely worth a visit should you find yourself in Egypt. Proceeding through these chambers leads us to a truly spectacular area, the bottom of the Great Shaft, which houses the huge multi-piece granite box.
Okay, here we have something.
Looking up the shaft, you can see the platform connected to the Persian tunnel that looks down on the box below, and above that is the internal superstructure of the Step Pyramid itself. The granite box, naturally called a sarcophagus or burial chamber, is a very interesting and unique artifact. Made up from 32 granite pieces, each weighing, by my estimation, somewhere between 3 to 5 tons. During the initial excavations, it was found partially destroyed and covered in rubble, and has since been reassembled. The granite blocks themselves are interesting, with relatively flat surfaces and sharp corners, if a bit damaged by time and rubble, and there is a single round plug block that supposedly locks the structure together. It's difficult to know what to really make of this box. There are faint outlines of hieroglyphs carved on some of the stones. Although they're in odd places, it's possible that when it was reassembled, some blocks may have been put back in different locations than their original spots. From what I was told, the glyphs are essentially numbering or identifying the blocks for assembly.
These very crude inscriptions here on the surface is marking the direction and the number of the pieces. It reminds me a lot of what happened when they dismantled the Isis temple and re-put it back together, but the only thing that this is in hieroglyphs.
The granite is well made and shows hammer or pounding dressing marks. I think it's possible that these blocks were made specifically for the box, or they could have been recycled and shaped from older granite pieces found above ground, which was a common practice throughout the ancient Egyptian civilization. As the kid is saying, infinite
I don't know what kind of a sarcophagus is this. You see this round piece?
Yeah.
This is like to lock it.
To lock it?
Yeah, that's what, like a what do you call it?
Like a pin.
Pin.
Yeah, like something that's in the like a pin, exactly.
What did he say about this?
This piece cracked. Yes,
It's like a locking pin.
Many of these pieces cracked.
I don't know if it's like sitting on top of a space inside here or something. I think so, yeah, you have to peel it up or something.
The wood above, there is more than one type of wood.
Holy
Some of them, I believe, goes back to ancient restoration, but not to the third
Yeah, that's the ground level where
but
there's
to the side period.
So did they just
But I didn't see any results
6
of
kilometers of tunnels.
radiocarbon.
As the kid was saying.
I personally sense that inheritors made lots of tunnels that is not originally with the original structure, but many new tunnels will have them. But many also of them are like
The chamber itself was renovated in ancient times, although not in the Third Dynasty, but rather in the side period that came after the Old Kingdom, and some of the limestone blocks that are in the walls, as well as the wood that's used down here, trace back to this time. Passages into the bedrock descend further from both sides of the large shaft, down to the 4th level. An attribute of the tunnels found this deep into the limestone bedrock is the natural occurrence of halite crystals, commonly known as rock salt. You can find these protruding from the walls in many underground areas in Egypt, a mineral form of sodium chloride that forms in isometric crystals. I've seen larger clusters of it in earlier times down here, although most of the large protruding crystals have been cleared from the walls since the renovation. Its growth can vary depending on the moisture content of the bedrock, so it's not a great aid in determining the overall age of the passages.
that
26th dynasty supports the pyramid.
Yeah.
exactly.
Salt
Exactly.
crystals.
From the 26th dynasty,
Big chunk of
restoration. Look at it in the ceiling as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I just want to tell you that what's remaining here from halite is nothing, almost. Because the original halite here was this long. Look at it, was this long.
Wow.
Yes, it was this long. I've seen it with my own eyes. There is still a piece from it in the Geology Museum.
It's this. It's the leaching out of the crystals.
Exactly. It is the salt with the moisture that
There's
is seeping
big
through
chunks of it.
the bedrock.
There's big chunks of it here.
grows and grows?
It grows like the ones in caves, but it could be thousands, it could be tens of thousands, we cannot be sure. Why? Because
nice
it
big
all
chunks of it,
depends
yeah.
on the intensity
Oh, yeah.
of the bedrock itself.
Like all here, Yusuf, there's some big chunks here still.
Yeah, I'm sure we look, all this is it, but it's covered with dust.
From the outside.
This is all halite.
From the in.
Some of these tunnels have not yet been fully cleared of debris, and as such are only around half height, although originally they would have been taller and likely lined in the alabaster blocks that we mentioned before. Down in these tunnels and chambers is where one of the true treasures from ancient Egypt was discovered. More than 40,000 of the exquisite stone vases, jars, and other objects. Images from the early excavations from the 20th century show you just how densely packed these artifacts were in places, and it's quite a thrill to see depictions and early photos of specific objects, like these beautiful examples, that you can then see in person, as many of the documented pieces are on display both at the Saqqara Museum and in the Cairo Museum. Although it hasn't opened yet, I'm hopeful that the new Grand Egyptian Museum will have more than enough room to display what has to be thousands more of these objects that have been gathering dust in warehouses for decades now. Many of these pieces were found broken, and during our visit here, I and the members of our group had quite an unexpected privilege, the chance to handle some of the many ancient fragments of these incredible objects that are still down here.
Yes.
Randomly.
Oh,
Oh, there's more chunks. Look at the chunks here.
all these are lined up because these were the pieces found.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
Yes, this is the treasure. يا رب استرها معنا ومع اللي جابونا. Yes.
Somebody calling him?
مين؟ احنا يا باشا معاك عايزين نشوف كل الأجزاء. كده كده في ناس كبيرة مش هتعرف تنزل المستوى اللي بلمع عليك فيه. طيب ماشي. ماشي يا سعادة الرئيس. So we can look here at part of the shattered pieces from the 40,000 yards.
Look at this. Just
Is that a shell?
Okay.
That is halite crystal.
Holy hell, all these are full of them.
I thought it was a shell, but no, it's the crystal.
There's a shell. There's the.
Yeah. Yusuf. Oh man, look at that. Beautiful.
Only for looking.
Yes.
Oh.
Look at the thickness.
Here is exactly the part that we were talking about earlier, and I'm sure we can see many examples.
Look at that.
I want to look, please,
yeah, you
for something.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry. Look at this, for example. Yeah. Guys, this is a good example here when we talk about machining, because what I was trying to explain for you, you can see here. Here is the center, here is the part of the tubular drill, here is the jar. What I was talking about is this.
It's tapered.
How you call it?
Tapered.
Tapered. It gets
That-
thinner
Exactly.
as it goes.
I want you to know that this is done on purpose. I have seen tens of examples that shows that this was done again and again and with a sequence. So this is the right nice. Imagine if you hold this with manual tool, no way. No way you can control the stone this much. So it's good to see this example because it shows exactly the capability of the manufacturer.
Yeah.
And it is the same one that we see in the pyramids. Some of the thin ones, and it's the same thing, but in a less angle. So this is a bit thicker. And then it also, what was the word again?
Tapers.
Tapers.
Handles.
Wow, it's a big piece of birch. Okay, surrender the piece.
The small one. The small one. Yeah, well, let's get.
And here it is again, in another piece. So when you see good amount of evidence, you have the confidence that what we are talking about is not imaginary. We're looking at the piece itself.
I've never had the opportunity to actually put my hands on the finished surfaces of jars or vases like these, as they're all locked up behind glass. But down here, there are fragments of what must have been truly exquisite stone jars. Some of them made from translucent forms of stone, others from diorite, gneiss, granite, schist, and many other materials. Many of them still bearing the undeniable tooling and lathe marks, including centering marks, from their construction, as documented by figures like Flinders Petrie and Christopher Dunn. The finished surfaces are utterly smooth to the touch, and, at least to my own eyes, hands and judgment, the curves perfect in proportions, and the material consistent in its thickness. Many of the unbroken examples of vases that were found in these galleries display some mind-bending attributes. This granite vase was crafted with such perfect symmetry that it appears to be balanced on its very tip. Other vases, like this one, are made with such precision that the hard and brittle stone material, with some very large crystal inclusions, is no thicker than the thickness of playing cards. Doing precision work in material that scores a 6, 7, 8, or even a 9 on the Mohs scale of hardness, and yes, there is a vase made from corundum in the museum, is no easy nor simple task, and quite beyond what can be achieved with the simple hand tools known to have been used in the Old Kingdom. I've taken a much closer look at the history and details of these stone vases and their advanced tool marks in previous videos, the links to which are below, so check those out if you're interested in a more in-depth look into their manufacture. That said, it's worth putting these artifacts into some context, as after several years of investigating this topic, I have what I think is a pretty clear hypothesis of what might have gone on here. First, let's look at the orthodox explanation for these vases. Many of them are attributed to the 3rd dynasty, but also many more of them have been found in 1st or 2nd dynasty tombs, the very beginning of the dynastic Egyptian civilization. The notoriously famous schist disc was found in the tomb of a 1st dynasty prince. There are also examples of pre-dynastic precision stone objects. One of my favourites that I've shown in several videos now is this gold-tipped hollow tube of lapis lazuli, displayed next to primitive bone and bead ornaments, that was found in a pre-dynastic burial site. From other excavations in the 1960s, in sites that are now flooded by the damming of the Nile River, stone jars were discovered in burials that were carbon dated back to at least 12,000 years ago. From these examples, we can infer that the manufacture of precision stone objects goes far back in time, beyond even that of the dynastic civilization. This presents something of a problem for mainstream Egyptology. It is acknowledged, however, at least to some degree, as stated by the infographic explaining these jars in the Saqqara Museum. Quote, "Stone vessels from the early dynastic period. More than 40,000 vases carved from hard stone were discovered in the galleries beneath the Step Pyramid. Many of these were heirlooms, dating from dynasties 1 and 2, and it is thought that Djoser had them buried under his pyramid after they were recovered from earlier tombs." End quote. It's interesting to see the concept of inheritance acknowledged here. One might wonder that if the 3rd dynasty inherited these objects, who's to say that the 1st or 2nd dynasty didn't also? One might also wonder just how such a marvellous craftsmanship into very hard stone developed in the very earliest periods of this civilization. There really isn't anything else from those first 2 dynasties that supports this type of precision stone manufacturing technique. What's interesting is that after these early dynasties, and according to the mainstream version of history, the production of stone objects like these seems to have ceased entirely. According to the officials, there is a distinction, a difference, between the manufacture of stone vessels before Imhotep in the 3rd dynasty and after Imhotep. Quoting the same infographic in the Saqqara Museum. Quote, "The production of stone vessels before Imhotep. The art of carving stone vessels, which were luxury items intended to hold mainly cosmetic materials and ointments, reached its peak during the first 2 dynasties. All of the types of stone found in Egypt were used." End quote. It's worth pointing out again that some of the vessels were made not only from stones found in Egypt, but also materials not found in Egypt, like lapis lazuli, for which the nearest known quarry is in Afghanistan. You might wonder how rare materials like that even got to Egypt, as we have examples of exotic stone artifacts in Egypt even in pre-dynastic times. What's interesting to me, however, is the clear distinction being made here before and after Imhotep. Why would this particular phrasing be on the wall of the Saqqara Museum? As we'll see, the method of stone vessel manufacture that is attributed to times after Imhotep is quite obviously inferior to that which came before. This point is inferred by the language used here, that stone vessel manufacture, quote, "reached its peak in the first 2 dynasties," end quote. I think the more accurate statement would be that it reached its peak at some unknown time before the 3rd dynasty. If Djoser treated his 40,000 vases as heirlooms, who's to say that the rulers of the 1st or 2nd dynasties, or even those buried in pre-dynastic tombs, were not doing the exact same thing? The truth is, we simply don't know how old these stone vessels are. After Imhotep, we have what becomes a tale of 2 entirely different industries. Also found in the Saqqara Museum is a scene on the wall that displays how vases and jars were made, from Imhotep and the 3rd dynasty onwards. This scene is often used by mainstream Egyptologists to explain how all stone vessels were made, but the devil here is, as they say, in the details. The primitive hand tools depicted in this scene are being used on large alabaster jars. Alabaster is much softer than granite or diorite, and it's easily carved with flint or stone chisels. We have many examples of the results of this work on display in Egyptian museums. It's obvious to anyone who looks closely that while these large alabaster jars are still remarkable in their beauty, they are clearly not made with the same degree of precision nor symmetry as the older, harder stone examples. The edges, lips, and curves are wavy and irregular, and some of them don't even stand up straight. Neither do they bear the same type of lathe or tooling marks as the older examples do. That the harder stone vessels were turned with precision is beyond doubt. It's been well established as far back as the 1800s by Flinders Petrie, and in modern times by a number of qualified machinists and engineers. And I get into those details in my other videos on this topic. No lathe is in evidence in this scene on the wall. I'm sure that this primitive method of crafting of alabaster vases, as displayed in this scene, improved over time, but it's just not the same thing as the machined hard stone vessels. Consider this information in the context of the mainstream story. None of it makes any logical sense. How was this advanced manufacturing technique that produced perfectly symmetrical and precise vessels in very hard stone developed in the earliest dynasties of ancient Egypt? And how can we explain the examples of this work that are admittedly pre-dynastic? How was this technique somehow utterly lost by the Third Dynasty? Why was the technique used in the Third Dynasty and beyond so inferior in its results? When we look at the same set of facts from the context of inheritance, longer timelines, and the potential for more advanced forms of technology being used in the distant past, perhaps far in the distant past by some unknown peoples, and the possibility that the precision hardstone vessels may well have been heirlooms from that time, rather than from the First or Second Dynasty, then it can all start to make just a little more sense. Imhotep likely knew what he was looking at. He was probably just as gobsmacked by the engineering, the sheer difficulty, beauty, and symmetry of the hardstone vessels as we are today. I think he was clearly a genius in his own right, a polymath, and he did his best to come up with manufacturing techniques to try and replicate these vessels, the results of which we can still see wrought in many of the alabaster examples that are on display in museums. Once again, we see human nature at work here, the desire to replicate, to imitate, to try and capture some of the meaning and significance of objects that were quite obviously deeply respected and precious. At least to me, this theory, and it is just a theory, makes a lot more sense of the evidence than do the contradictions of the orthodox explanation. It also made the experience of going down into the catacombs beneath the Step Pyramid so very special for me personally. I think some of these stone fragments of jars could be immensely old, and it was a real privilege to get to handle them. A couple more highlights that I'd like to show you here before we get to even lower levels and something that I don't think has ever been documented publicly. Check out this fragment, lying amongst other chunks of stone on the floor.
Holy crap, are you kidding me? Holy shit.
Oh, that's heavy. That's okay. Don't no problem. It's okay. Just like a gift from the government.
That's metal?
Oh my God, look at this.
It's all beat up, so hard to say.
That is heavy too. Wow. That's the outside.
Some finished, but it's a beast.
Yeah.
Oh wow, look is that diorite?
Bottoms. Feels like it's something like that, yeah.
A huge piece from a thick granite or diorite bowl.
Those things were heavy, huh?
I'm not sure if this was ever really intended for cosmetic ointments. All I can say is that working in this type of stone is no joke, as just this segment was astonishingly heavy.
Yeah.
Oh wow, look at that. Is that diorite?
Bottoms. Feels like it's something like that, yeah. Oh. Those things were heavy, huh?
That one has a grip on it too. That big one.
It's smooth.
Flip it over, it's actually
Don't break it.
Any more than
I saw some overcuts in some of the other ones. Like they're actually cutting into that with the saw.
yeah.
All the stones you can see in your eyes must come.
It's one of the remarkable attributes of the hard stone vases, the sheer variety of shapes and sizes. They range from thimble-sized all the way up to huge coffers that would take several men to lift. In another corner of the passages on the 4th level, in amongst all of the stacked blocks, we found a piece of alabaster that had a good example of a tube drill hole in it. This is a more complete fragment of the types of stone that made up the 50 to 80 tons of material that were removed from down here and buried out in front of the entrance. I'm not sure what purpose that holes like this might have served, but they certainly seem to have been a common occurrence in the masonry here. We had the chance to visit the 5th level of the catacombs also, which is still a working area. Supposedly there are lower levels from this one still, and many passages down here are still being excavated and explored. This was one of those places that filming or photography is, well, let's say discouraged. Getting to this level wasn't a case of simply going down some more stairs. You had to descend down a roughly 30-foot ladder through a shaft from the 4th level. Something of a gut check moment, similar to going down into the Osiris shaft at Giza. It was down here that I saw something remarkable, something that I wasn't aware of before this visit, and something that I don't think has ever been documented publicly before. At the end of one of the myriad of passages, somewhere around 200 feet below the surface, were 2 exquisite alabaster boxes, one with its lid still intact.
Quite the box.
Carved from large single pieces of this translucent stone, the smaller box had some very clean tube drill holes cut into either end of its lid. The larger box, located just behind it, was open, allowing a look inside. It's a bit tough to see as this is a lower quality recording, but there was a very clear overcut on the inside edge of the bottom of the box.
There's overcuts in here now. Oops.
I've discussed overcuts in several videos, and there's something that just don't happen if you're using hand tools to slowly, very slowly, grind away stone. I think it's one of those signatures of some form of advanced tools or technology having been employed.
It's crazy. Underneath the Step Pyramid.
You can find overcuts on some granite slabs and obelisks, like these examples here at Karnak Temple. You can also find them on some of the incredible polished diorite statues, down at the seat, as shown here, or under the arms. In a previous video on ancient Egyptian stone cutting methods, I discussed the extremely slow rate of grinding away granite or basalt with the traditional primitive methods supposedly used to create such objects. And diorite is even harder and therefore would be slower to grind away. It would take hours and hours of work to create these overcuts, which is clearly what they are. It just wouldn't happen with hand tools. Something else, something that removed the stone at a much faster rate, therefore must have been used here, and likewise it must have been used in the construction of this alabaster box. Ultimately, the tunnels and artifacts found beneath the Step Pyramid represent an enduring mystery. It certainly seems possible to me that both the catacombs and the objects down here could have existed long before Djoser and Imhotep ever moved into the neighborhood in the 3rd dynasty and began work. Did they find an incredible series of tunnels and catacombs here? Perhaps they thought it was an ideal place to store and bury their thousands of inherited heirloom treasures with the king, and then decided to build a pyramid-shaped monument on top. It's just a theory, but looking at the evidence that we still have, and considering the contradictions inherent in the Orthodox story, maybe it's a theory that is worthy of some further investigation. I hope everybody enjoyed this exclusive look into the bedrock below the Step Pyramid, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers. Alright, there it is. I hope you all enjoyed that exclusive look into the tunnels and catacombs and artifacts that can be found beneath the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. It really was probably the major highlight for me on my most recent trip to Egypt. It was entirely some new and unexpected surprises down there, particularly those alabaster boxes were just kind of mind-blowing. We are going to be going back down to the Step Pyramid on the next trip to Egypt, which right now is looking like it will be November of 2022. So if you're interested in that, keep your eyes on this channel and on my website. I expect in about a week from now there'll be an announcement made. If you're a channel member or a patron of the channel, you've already got some information about the tour. On that topic, I do want to thank everybody who does support the channel through that value for value model. It's the only way I'm able to spend the time it takes to make and produce these videos. So I tremendously appreciate all the support, whether that's through Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar, or any of the methods. They're all described on my website. It's unchartedx.com/support if you're interested in that type of thing. I do also like to thank specific supporters and give out some real credits for these videos. These are real credits. They work the same way that Hollywood credits do. You can use them in LinkedIn bios. It's exactly the same thing. And I do this in two forms with executive and associate executive producers. So starting with the executive producers, I want to thank MLE Engineering, John and Marcia over at MLE. They've been fantastic supporters of mine over the years. They often come in and support me in larger amounts. I am just tremendously grateful for their support over the years. So thank you, John and Marcia. Skills 24/7 over on a Twitch stream kind of made my day, kind of blew me out of the water with some huge support over on the Twitch stream with a large amount that was entirely unexpected, as well as gifting out tons of subs on the Twitch stream. So Skills 24/7, I know I said it in the stream, we had that conversation, but thank you so much again, mate, for all that support. Donald Roy, also an executive producer for this episode. Thank you for the support, Donald. Reagan Stewart came in as well, and Reagan said to tell Jimmy to read some Petrie West and Dunn before he goes back on JRE. Hopefully one day you and Yusuf can get on there. Cheers, brother. Thanks, Reagan. I thought Jimmy did a great job on the Rogan Experience. If you guys haven't seen it, Jimmy from the Bright Insight channel, a friend of mine went on the Rogan podcast. I kind of connected the dots there. They reached out to me trying to get a hold of him in the first place, so I knew it was going to happen. He was kind enough to give me a shout out, and Rogan mentioned the channel too. So thanks to Jimmy for doing that. And who knows, maybe in the future, I'll get the chance to go on there. You never know. Tattered Metal came in and at the executive producer level from stowboarding.com website. He wrote, "Hey brother, I love your channel and videos on ancient megalithic work. Thank you again for the great research, travel, writing, producing, editing, and everything else that goes into your top-notch videos. Keep tearing it up." Mate, thank you so much, Tattered Metal. And now rounding out the executive producers for this episode, Chad Baldy came in at that level of executive producer. Thank you, Chad, for the support. He wrote, "Hi Ben, I came across your YouTube channel a few months ago and have since watched many of your videos. The way you call into question many of the modern day interpretations of prehistory is refreshing to say the least. I think that your work is well balanced between studying historical records, putting your feet on the ground, and posing new big picture questions for consideration. Your videos are also masterful and captive. Best, Chad." Thanks again, Chad. Okay, moving on to the associate executive producers for this episode, starting with Cortez Studio. Again, another long-term supporter of mine. Cortez Studio said, "Great work as always, Ben." Mate, thank you so much again for the continued support over the years. It's greatly appreciated. Brian Russell came in at associate executive level and said, "Thank you for the amazing content. It definitely changed my life watching while in lockdown these last 2 years. Keep up the amazing work. I may never reach Egypt, but you have brought her home for me. Thank you, Ben." Well, thank you, Brian, and I'm really glad that it helped you out during the pandemic. I've got that comment from a number of people, and I'm very glad that they work like that for you. Chris Partney, another associate executive producer, also Chris being another long-term supporter of mine, somebody that has really supported me over on Twitch as well. Kind of a reminder to everybody, I do stream live on Twitch if you're interested in seeing how the videos are made. I stream over there 3 days a week, roughly, Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Chris has shown a bunch of support through the Twitch channel, so thank you again, Chris. And then lastly, Janet Diane Blevins at the associate executive producer level. And Janet wrote in and said, "Thank you so much. I so enjoy your channel. I went to Egypt last month and Peru 12 years ago. Have you checked out the pyramids outside of Mexico City? Many blessings. Keep up the good work." Thank you again, Janet, for that support. I actually haven't been to Teotihuacan, to the pyramids outside of Mexico City. I've been up to the Yucatan a couple of times. Definitely need to get there in the near future. All right, well, I hope I haven't carried on too long here and you've enjoyed some of the footage exiting out of the Step Pyramid. I hope you all enjoyed that look into what's down there, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.